In this video I'll show the basic functionality of the Aperture Cutscene Editor while creating a very simple cutscene that involves camera movement along a path and object rotation and spawning an object using an event. So I've already set up this simple scene that has a door with a pivot so that it can open just by rotating it, and a small room inside, and a camera. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up the cutscene editor, which you can do by going to Window and Aperture Cutscene Editor. And right now there's no cutscenes in this scene, so you can manually add one. It'll tell you here how to do that, or you can click on this button and it'll automatically create one. So it created this game object where the cutscene data is stored, and there's a list of cutscenes here. So you can create a bunch of different cutscenes. You can delete them by deleting the game objects. So to rename the cutscene, you go to the Cutscene tab and type in a new name. So this will be called and we want this cutscene to play when the map starts. So you can click on that and it automatically plays. So in the Inspector tab is where you can change settings for the different elements of the cutscene. So right now there's only one element, which is a curve clip, and it has no target right now, which is why it's showing up red, showing you that there's an error. So this curve clip is what's going to control the camera movement along the curve. So we want to set the target to the main camera. You can do that just by dragging the main camera onto the target, and it'll tell you that it'll show different update modes. You can use an action script, which right now there's none applied to this object. We'll apply one later. Or a direct variable access, which allows you to access variables on the camera. So for instance, if we want to change the camera field of view, we can do that just by selecting that, and then adjusting the value here. So, but we don't want to do that. We want to switch back to action and reset the field of view. So the action that we want to apply to this is under Component, Cutscene, Actions, Follow Curve. So we add that component to the camera, and you can see that this update's now showing two different options for what we want to control with this value. And you can see that when I move it, the position over here changes, but nothing actually happens now because we haven't defined a curve for the camera to actually follow. So I'm going to go back here and reset the value on the right side to 1. So it goes from 0 to 1. And now I'm going to create the curve that the camera will actually follow. So to do that, I'm going to create an empty game object, call it camera curve, and I'm going to put this in the camera root, just for organization. And then to put a curve on it, you go to Component, Cutscene, and Curve. And that will automatically create one curve point, that you can see here. To add more curve points, you just duplicate the object. So you can duplicate it with Control D, or I suppose you could duplicate it up here. So we want the camera to start somewhere up here, and then move down, and then go into the door, and then maybe circle around. And it's also a good idea to change, in Unity 3.5, it's a good idea to change the icon scaling to not scale. It's a little easier to work with. So now to assign the camera to follow the curve, we select the camera again and drag the camera curve object onto the curve variable in the follow curve script. So now when we move the timeline, the camera will actually follow the curve. So by default, it has this auto look direction, which kind of makes the camera follow, like look in the direction that the curve is actually going, which can be useful. But we don't want to do that for our use. We want to define a custom look target. So to do that, we can create a game object, call it camera target, and put it in there. And then you can assign a target component, which isn't necessary, but it just helps you see that there's a target there. All it does is draw a little target icon. So now we want to duplicate this curve and call it camera target curve, and we're going to do the same thing here that we did with the camera, applying a follow curve, and then assign the camera target curve to the curve. And then in the camera, we want to assign the camera target to the target variable. So now the camera is constantly looking at that target. So in order to move that target so that it's moving in a direction that we want, we can adjust the curve points to sort of always be a little bit ahead of the camera. I want it to stop here, so it kind of focuses in the middle. And I want the entire animation right now is only 1 second long, so I want to make that a lot longer. So you can do that by dragging the edges of this. So let's make it 10 seconds long. You can also type in a value here. So now that's 10 seconds. Now we also want to name this camera move. Now we need an additional curve that controls the camera target. So to do that, you go to curve track and add new curve. So make this one 10 seconds as well. Set camera target in there. So now they both move together, but the camera movement is still a little bit broken. So to fix that, we can adjust the timing on the camera movement. So we want it to move ahead of this camera a little bit more. So if you double click on one of these, or you click on this edit curve, you can adjust the curve with more options. So if I move this up, it'll start at about halfway through the curve, which is a little bit better, but there's still some problems. So I'm just going to try to tweak it and get what we want out of it. You can make the entire animation shorter, I think, by deleting one of those. And we can move this back to maybe about 6 seconds so that it ends before the camera movement ends, which gives some nicer animation, more what we want. So now we've got the camera animation working pretty good. Now we need to animate the door. So to do that, we add another curve track, and I'm going to name this one target, and name this open door. And drag the door pivot object into the target. We'll move it over here. So to set the rotation of an object, there's two ways you can do it. You can use an action, or you can use a direct variable axis. So for direct variable axis, you can select transform dot Euler angles y. So if we set the value on the right side to to 90, then it'll start closed and then open 90 degrees, which works, but we might want to do it with an action for whatever reason. So to do that, we switch back to action, and with the door pivot selected, you add a set rotation action. And you can see that now there's set rotation X, Y, and Z. So we want to set rotation on Y. So now we have the same thing that we had before. So we want it to open, to start opening at about right there. And I want it to close at about here. So we can add keys by double-clicking on it and then double-clicking in here, which will add keys. Alternately, you can add keys directly in here. I'm just pressing delete to delete these keys by clicking on add key and then clicking on here to add the keys, and then click that again to disable it. So this entire thing is 3.6 seconds. So I'll just make it 3.5 seconds, just so it's a little cleaner. So these keys will be used to open the door and then leave it open for a bit and then close it. So I'll set this at 6 and set this to about that. And then we set the value here back to 0, value here to 90, and the value here to 90 as well. So now it opens and then closes. And we can adjust this waviness by first flattening these. I guess we just need to flatten them, that's fine. So now it's a smooth animation opening, and then no animation, and then a smooth animation closing. So we can preview the entire animation by clicking the preview button. And of course you can also press play, and since we have it set to play automatically, it starts playing. So the last thing that we'll do for this cutscene is add an event that spawns an object. So to add an event, you click on the Add Event button here, and then click somewhere on this event timeline. So I just added an event here. You can drag it around to wherever you want it, or you can set an exact time. So set it to 7 seconds. And it works similar to the way this works, where you have a target. So we need to make a game object that will handle spawning the object when this event happens. So create an empty game object and call it box spawner, and we'll apply a spawn object event on it. And then in here we can specify the object that we want to spawn. So I've already got a, let's see, I think this is, no, this isn't it. So we've got this falling cube object, which is just a cube with a collider and a rigid body, so as physics. So I'll go back to the box spawner and then drag that onto there. And I want it to spawn right in the middle of the room, so I'll just put it there, and then set the target of this event to that object. So now we've got a list of components on that object. So there's transform and spawn object. So we want to use spawn object, and the function that we want to call is spawn, and we want to use the empty object for now because we've already defined the object that it will spawn here. So one thing to remember about events is that they are not triggered when previewing in the editor. So if I go over here and I preview it, it's not going to spawn. They only get triggered when the game is actually playing. So to test it, we can click play. So the object spawns. I think we can actually rotate this so that it spawns kind of at a strange angle. That should make it a little more interesting. So the events sometimes have different variations for their functions. In this case, this has a variation for an override object, which allows you to specify a different object from what's here. So, for instance, if I wanted to create a, let's see if I can find another prefab to use. Let's just spawn this sphere instead. So I set the override object to this sphere. So instead of spawning a box with physics now, it'll just spawn a sphere that floats there because it doesn't have physics. And it actually spawns on top of the light, I think, so it blocks it. Cast a shadow. So that's basically um, the introduction to the interface and how to create a basic cutscene. Um, I'll make some more video tutorials showing how to do more advanced stuff like using multiple cutscenes and managing different cameras and stuff like that.